All right, so last class we talked about the birth of Islam, the spread of Islam, and the first two crusades. And we went over what a crusade is and why they were important and the events of the first two crusades. And then we talked about Saladin and his recapture of Jerusalem in 1187. So at that point, that's where we pick up today. We're going to keep going with the Crusades and then learn about the Ottoman Empire. So the Third Crusade is perhaps the most famous of all of them. There were a lot of crusades. We've already learned about the first two. And the Third Crusade came when Pope Gregory VIII called for it in 1189 in order to recapture Jerusalem from Saladin. And three different kings answered this call, all of whom were very good generals. You had King Philip II of France, you had King Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, and then, of course, you had King Richard the Lionheart of England. You may have heard of him. The tale of Robin Hood takes place during this time. Perhaps you've heard of that. So the Crusaders, during this crusade, did recapture some of the Holy Land. They were able to get back some of the cities from the Muslims who had taken it over. But they were unable to recapture Jerusalem. So this was not seen as a fully successful crusade since Jerusalem was their goal. They wanted to recapture Jerusalem for Christ and his church, and they were unable to do that. So while the Third Crusade was ultimately a failure for the Crusaders, it did accomplish something. Richard the Lionheart and Saladin signed a treaty that allowed the Muslims to maintain control of Jerusalem as long as they allowed unarmed Christians to make pilgrimages there again. And remember, that was the whole point of the Crusades in the first place. The first crusade was made in order to ensure that Christians could make pilgrimages to the Holy Land again. So with this, Richard the Lionheart, even though he was unable to capture Jerusalem back from the Muslims, he did make some strides as far as allowing Christians to make pilgrimages there again. So you could say the ultimate goal, or the original goal, of the First Crusade was once again accomplished after the Third Crusade. But crusades continued well into the 1200s, into the 13th century, and the Fourth Crusade was absolutely crazy. It was nuts, okay? It was a complete debacle. What happened here was that Pope Innocent III called this crusade to recapture Jerusalem. Now, the Venetians, people from the city of Venice, they made the ships for this expedition. You couldn't make this expedition without ships and a lot of armor, and the Venetians made this. However, they would only give the ships to the Crusaders under the condition that first they have to attack Venice's rival city of Zara. So in order to get the ships they needed for the crusade, the Crusaders first had to attack Zara. Now this was a Christian city in Europe, just a rival city with Venice. The Crusaders did this. They said, okay, without this we can't have the ships and go on our crusade, so I guess we'll do what the Venetians are asking us to do. So the Crusaders did this and killed thousands of people. Thousands of other Christians. You have other Christians killing each other just because the Crusaders were told, hey, you got to ransack the city of Zara in order to go on your Fourth Crusade. Now, the Pope did not know about this when it was going on. And when this happened, the Pope said, are you guys crazy? You're not even setting a foot in the Holy Land to capture it back from the Muslims. That is not the point of this crusade at all. So with this, the Pope called off the crusade and excommunicated both the Crusaders who had killed the Christians in Zara and the Venetians who had ordered them to do so. To excommunicate means to be banished from the church. All right, so they were no longer considered to be within the church. They were excommunicated. So this left the Crusaders with no money, no crusade, and essentially nothing to lose. And that's a very dangerous place to be in, with nothing to lose and no money. And they're pretty much now still in Zara and not sure where to go. And somebody capitalized on this desperation and His name was Alexios Angelos. He was the Byzantine prince at this time. Remember, the Byzantine Empire was still around. And he said that he would fund their crusade, that they could keep going with this Fourth Crusade, even without the Pope's blessing, if they would attack Constantinople and make him king. He wanted to be the king of all of the Byzantine Empire, not just a Byzantine prince. And at that point, the Crusaders kind of shrugged and said, well, why not? I mean, we've come this far. We've already attacked the city of Zara. We've been excommunicated from the church. We still haven't set a foot in the Holy Land, and we still want to take it back from the Muslims. And if this is the only way to do it, let's do it. So that's exactly what they did. They attacked Constantinople and made Alexios Angelos king. But Angelos was quickly dethroned, leaving the Crusaders broke once again. Before Angelos could make good on his promise to fund their crusade, he was dethroned. Okay? His kingship did not last hardly at all. So this left the Crusaders right back where they were. So now they have attacked Zara, killed a lot of Christians there, attacked Constantinople, one of the patriarch cities of the church, and killed a lot of Christians there, and now they're still broke and still can't go on a crusade. So they responded to this by violently pillaging the city of Constantinople, because they literally had nothing to lose. They felt like they had been betrayed at every turn and were so frustrated. And so the Crusaders violently pillaged Constantinople, killing and raping thousands of people. So this is what officially ended the Fourth Crusade, with thousands of Christians dead and not a foot having been placed in the Holy Land. So not only was this a failure for the Christians, but it was absolutely insane, led to the killing and raping of thousands of them without a foot having been placed in the Holy Land. A huge and total failure. So after the Fourth Crusade failed so badly, you would think that maybe this whole concept of crusading might start to die out, but it actually did not. Pope Innocent III, after the Fourth Crusade failed so badly, decided that he needed to rectify crusading as a noble deed done for the Lord and for the church. He said that the whole concept of crusading has been tarnished, and now when people think of crusades, they think of these crazy Fourth Crusaders who killed everybody and didn't set a foot in the Holy Land. We need to have a fifth crusade to try to take back Jerusalem, and once we do this, then people will look fondly on crusading again, and it will seem like a good thing again, and we can make crusading great again, so to speak. So these crusaders invaded the Holy Land, but this time they went through Egypt instead of going through the Byzantine Empire. However, the Fifth Crusade was a failure as well. They failed to take it from the Muslims. So right now, if you're keeping score at home, there have been 5 crusades, and the Christians are 1 for 5. They won the first crusade magnificently, but after that, every crusade has been more or less a failure for them. But the crusades kept coming. All right, the Sixth Crusade was in the year 1228, and this one was actually semi-successful, not a complete success. But what made the Sixth Crusade different from every other crusade is that it was diplomatic. It was not a fighting crusade. The Crusaders did not invade anywhere. It was a diplomatic crusade. And what happened was that King Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire negotiated with Sultan al-Kamil, who was in control of the Holy Land at this time. And they both said, hey, we don't want another bloody crusade. We don't want more bloodshed to come from this. So in order to avoid more bloodshed, they made a deal. The Sultan agreed to give part of the Holy Land to the Christians, including the coveted Jerusalem, the shining jewel of the Holy Land, provided they don't allow Jews in. Muslims and Jews historically do not like each other, and so the Muslim Sultan al-Kamil said, okay, you guys can have Jerusalem, but just promise us you won't allow Jews into your city. At which point Frederick said, okay, you got it, and kind of compromised on that. He said, we'll keep the Jews out if you give us control of the Holy Land. So the Sixth Crusade was actually semi-successful, but not a total success, since they had to compromise and did not get the entire Holy Land back. Now, by the 1240s, this treaty had actually expired, and Muslims had regained control of Jerusalem once again. Okay, it's just trading hands back and forth. And so this led to, you guessed it, another crusade. Okay, the current pope at that time called for a seventh crusade. All right, so what this was that King Louis the Ninth of France, he led his army through Egypt to get to the Holy Land, went the same route as the Fifth Crusaders. But this time, he and his army were defeated even before they reached the Holy Land. So they didn't even get to set foot in the Holy Land, much less Jerusalem, before being defeated by the Muslims. So this was another big failure for the Christian Crusaders. But that didn't stop them. In 1270, there was an eighth crusade led by King Louis the Ninth. All right. And this crusade wasn't even about the Holy Land. So at this point, you can really see how crusading has kind of lost its way. We've come a long way from the first crusade as kind of like a noble deed to win back the Holy Land for God. That way we can make pilgrimages there again. At this point, the Crusaders had completely lost their way. So this crusade was not even about the Holy Land. Louis tried to capture the Muslim-controlled city of Tunis in northern Africa. It's right here on the map, okay? So here is Tunis, where he invaded. This was the crusade. This is the Holy Land. Not even close to each other, but still he called this a crusade because it was against Muslims. So this expedition really showed that the Crusades had become just a Christian versus Muslim thing, and it wasn't even about pilgrimages anymore. It wasn't really about this noble endeavor to recapture Jerusalem for the Lord anymore, like it was during the First Crusade. Now it has just become, hey, we hate Muslims, let's fight them. So you can really see how crusading really started to diminish and decline after the first three. Now, in fact, King Louis died right after he got into Tunisia, right after he landed on the North African coast. And at this point, his army just kind of looked around and shrugged and said, hey, we didn't really want to go on this stupid crusade anyway, so they just gave up and returned to Europe. Okay, so this one was rather silly. And then in the years 1271 and 1272 came the final crusade, the Ninth Crusade. All right, so this last crusade was when Prince Edward of England sailed with his army to the Holy Land. He said, okay, we've done this before, we've captured the Holy Land before, it's been in Muslim hands for a long time, let's try one more time to win back Jerusalem for the Lord. So they actually had a handful of victories as they made their way from England to Jerusalem. And things started to look bright and said, hey, maybe crusading is kind of on its way back, and maybe we can make it a good thing again instead of a terrible thing like it was with like the Fourth Crusade and the Eighth Crusade. Maybe we can actually bring back Christian control to the Holy Land and make pilgrimages there again, and things will be good. But then they were forced to withdraw from the region because domestic issues in England were kind of starting to mount, and that took priority. So Prince Edward pretty much got message that things weren't going too well back home in England, and he said, oh, pause the crusade, we got to turn around and go home. So that's just what they did. The Crusaders just went home after that. Now, this is really significant because it showed how the crusading spirit in Europe was kind of dead by this point. Europeans had become so disillusioned by this whole concept of crusading that they didn't even really care about the results anymore. I mean, just the fact that Prince Edward could call this crusade and then nobly go to, make his way to the Holy Land and then just basically get a message from back home that he needed to come back real quick and be like, oh, yep, let's just quit before they even got to the Holy Land. It really showed that the crusading spirit in Europe was kind of dead, and this was kind of a half-hearted attempt to win back the Holy Land. So this led to the collapse of the last remaining Christian strongholds in the Holy Land by the end of the 1200s. So by the end of the 1200s, crusading was officially dead. They were officially over, the Crusades were, and Muslims had taken firm control of the entire Middle East. Now, in what ways were the Crusades, just kind of looking back on them, in what ways were they good, and in what ways were they bad? Because very few things in history were all good or all bad. So, first, let's talk about the negative or ineffective results of the Crusades. Well, first of all, you have tens of thousands of people who were killed, all right? It's a war, you're going to have people get killed. So, that, first and foremost, was a negative result of the Crusades. Also, it was a drain on Europe's resources at a time when food was kind of scarce and literacy was on the decline, and things weren't going great. The Dark Ages we talk about. At a time when Europe really needed resources, they were all redirected towards the Crusades. Also, obviously, the Fourth Crusade was incredibly negative. Not only did it kill so many people in both Zara and Constantinople, but the Fourth Crusade made the Byzantine Empire weak, and it made them very susceptible to Muslim invasion. And in a few centuries, the Byzantine Empire was overtaken by the Muslim Ottoman Empire, which we'll talk about in a second here. Also, it didn't establish any long term Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land. They did have the Christian kingdoms that were established for close to a century after the First Crusade, but after that they crumbled and really were never resurrected again. And it also caused greater divisions within Christianity and caused more enmity between Christians and Muslims. Christians and Muslims started to see each other as staunch enemies more than ever because of the Crusades. And remember, one of the reasons why the First Crusade was called by Pope Urban II was to bring Christians together after the Great Schism of 1054. And instead, the Crusades kind of did the opposite of that. It caused greater divisions within Christianity because of things like the Fourth Crusade, where you have Christians killing Christians and things like that. So a lot of negative, a lot of ineffective results of the Crusades. But the Crusades weren't entirely a bad thing. In some ways, the Crusades were productive or positive for those who were involved. First of all, the Crusades did open up the Muslim world for Christian pilgrimages again. Even once Muslims took over the Middle East for good at the end of the 1200s, it was still open to Christian pilgrimages again. Remember, that was the whole point of the First Crusade, was to open up the Holy Land so that Christians could make pilgrimages there once again. So that initial goal was actually accomplished with the Crusade. So that was certainly a positive result. Also, it caused many people to kind of examine their religious beliefs. Kind of like, well, why am I a Christian? Why am I a Muslim? And in that way, it really kind of strengthened both religions, because people started to think about, why do I believe what I believe? If people are actually dying for this, it's important to know why you are a Christian or why you are a Muslim, or if you want to be. So in those ways, the Crusades were somewhat positive and productive. So the Crusades also led to the creation of the largest Muslim nation in all of history, and that was called the Ottoman Empire. Now, this empire was founded in 1301, shortly after the Ninth Crusade, and it lasted until the end of World War I in 1918. So over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire lasted. Now, the Ottoman Empire was founded by a guy named Osman I. He was the first Sultan of the Ottoman Turks, okay, which is what they're called, the Ottoman Turks, and that is why it was called the Ottoman Empire. Now, which leader or sultan expanded the Ottoman Empire once the 1400s came along? His name was Mehmed the Conqueror. Mehmed the Conqueror. So in the 1400s, he expanded the Ottoman Empire from just modern-day Turkey into Europe, okay, specifically Greece and Macedonia. He conquered, and all that area in the green right there became a part of the Ottoman Empire. And then in 1453, the Byzantine Empire fell to Mehmed. Remember, the Byzantine Empire, the former Eastern Roman Empire that was still around after the fall of Rome. Okay, it existed for several centuries after the fall of Rome, but here Mehmed the Conqueror conquered the Byzantine Empire, and it was no more. Okay, so this is seen as really the end of the Byzantine Empire. And then the Sultan who was seen as most responsible for making the Ottoman Empire extremely powerful, he actually lived during the 1500s, and his name was Suleiman the Magnificent. Somebody in class, I think, is doing their project on this person, Suleiman the Magnificent. Now, he was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire during its height of greatest territorial expansion. Now, remember, territorial expansion is something that was very common in ancient days, not so common nowadays, but it was still very common here in the Middle Ages. So he conquered Mesopotamia, all right, so this area right here, modern day Iraq, Kuwait, and Syria. And that gave the Ottoman Empire a great deal of control over trade in the world because that was kind of one of the trade routes of the Silk Road. And then even after the Silk Road fell, you have this kind of land bridge here that if you want to trade with any of these major countries, you have to go through the Ottoman Empire. Is kind of at the crossroads of the world there, the crossroads of three continents is what the Ottoman Empire controlled there. So it was kind of a land bridge and gave them a lot of control over trade. Suleiman also took over more of Europe, including modern day Hungary. Another way that Suleiman expanded the power of the Ottoman Empire was he focused on naval power. He built up the Ottoman fleet of ships, he built up the Ottoman Empire's navy. So under him, the Ottoman Turks just dominated Indian Ocean trade. So not only did he focus on territorial expansion, but he also really focused on trade. Remember talking in the ancient times about how certain leaders valued trade more than territorial expansion, and others valued territorial expansion more than trade. Well, Suleiman focused on both. He saw both as really, really important, and Muslims kind of dominated Indian Ocean trade under Suleiman the Magnificent and the Ottoman Turks. And the Ottoman Empire traded most with the city of Venice, okay, right up here in Italy, okay, and Venice was its own republic at this point. And this made Venice very wealthy, and it kind of helped make the Renaissance possible. We'll be talking about the Renaissance next unit, but it really started in Italy. And the fact that Venice was constantly being traded with by the Ottoman Turks really helped them to become very wealthy and helped to make the Renaissance possible because people could afford to start focusing on art and literature and music again. Now, one event that signaled kind of the pinnacle of the Ottoman Empire's power and expansion was in the year 1529. And at this time, Suleiman besieged the city of Vienna, Austria, that's right here on the European map. So he's gotten pretty deep into Europe by this point. All this area in the yellow is under his control, under the control of the Ottoman Turks. So this was Suleiman's attempt to take over all of Eastern Europe under Muslim control. He wanted to take over all of this area and make it part of his kingdom. Now, the Turks were unable to capture Vienna, but after this, there was kind of military tension in the region between Europeans and the Turks for about 150 years. They were seen as enemies for 150 years because Suleiman tried to capture Vienna. And this military tension over a century and a half eventually culminated in the Battle of Vienna. Now, the Battle of Vienna in 1683, this was a decisive victory for the, quote, Christian coalition of European power. So all of these Christian nations in Europe said, okay, we have to band together to fight the invading Ottoman Turks. Okay, they said this is not a crusade. We're not trying to capture the Holy Land back. We're just trying to defend our territory in Europe. So the Battle of Vienna in 1683 was a huge victory for the Christian coalition. The Turks were pushed back and kind of marked the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire's descent from power. After that, they were slowly kicked out of Europe altogether, and eventually, after World War I, they fell completely, and the Ottoman Empire does not exist any longer. Now, throughout the late Middle Ages, and even into the Renaissance, which we'll get to next unit, the Ottoman Empire really impacted Europe because they were arguably the most powerful empire in the world at that point. And they controlled all of this area and Turkey, even going into northern Africa here. They controlled a huge chunk of this map. Okay, they were the number one enemy of the nations in Europe. That's how they were seen. They were seen as any Christian country's number one enemy. For example, the Holy Roman Empire saw the Ottoman Turks as their number one enemy for centuries. And at one point, Europe's resources were split in literally three different directions. Okay, they were going to the to fight the Turks on their eastern border. Okay, so they were going east on the map as well to fight the Turks on the eastern border, and then their resources were also going west to explore the Americas, okay, and to convert the Native Americans to Christianity and to get their goods and exploit them and things like that. And then also, they were attempting to heal divisions in the church within Europe that had been brought about by the Protestant Reformation, which we'll also get to next unit. So Europe was in a really poor state at this point, when they were literally being split into three directions. All their resources were being pulled into three directions, going east to fight the Turks, going west to explore the Americas, and then in Europe trying to heal divisions within the church. All right. So with that, we finish up talking about the Crusades and the Ottoman Empire. As always, ask me, let me know if I can explain anything a little bit better or if you have any questions for me.